So first step we're going to do to take the intercooler off of the engine, we're going to loosen the 8mm bolt that holds the worm clamp to the factory throttle body hose. From there, we're going to remove the factory recirculation valve, which is going to be two 10mm bolts. You can remove it completely from the vehicle by taking the clamp off the hose and pulling the vacuum line off, or you can leave it hanging off to the side. Next step will be to remove the 12mm bolt that holds the intercooler to the bracket and the other two 12mm bolts that hold it to the turbo. Let's get started.
Now that we've discussed the location of all the bolts and the location of the parts that we're going to be removing from the vehicle, we're going to start by taking them off one by one, working from the driver's side of the vehicle over to the passenger side of the vehicle. Here we're loosening the worm clamp. Next step is to loosen the bolts on the recirculation valve.
Next, we're going to remove the one 12mm bolt that holds the intercooler to the bracket. Next step is going to be to remove the two 12mm bolts on the turbo side. Be very careful not to strip these and or cross-thread them when reinstalling. Also, take your time and be very careful not to damage them because these are very important. Just a reminder, be very careful not to damage the recirculation valve while removing the intercooler. We're going to remove the intercooler from the throttle body hose here. Just take your time and wiggle it out little by little. The last step of removal is going to be to loosen the worm clamp located at the bottom of the throttle body hose. Once you have it loosened enough, you're going to just take your time, wiggle it off. It might take a little bit of force, but be very gentle. Just work it off. As you can see right off the bat, the Mishimoto looks a little better. Obviously the red color helps, but in quality wise, this feels a little bit more durable. This is stiffer. You can feel the difference in the rubber material that they use as well as the silicone. You can notice inside there is restriction in the factory hose. There is more airflow that can be delivered through the Mishimoto hose, as well as keeping it cooler. So for this install, we're going to reuse the factory worm clamps. What I recommend is putting them on the hose and just snugging them up. This is going to make install easier. Do not over tighten them to where you cannot maneuver them to the right spot. You want to be able to rotate them. It makes it a little easier to work with. So when you get the first one on, remember the orientation that it went. You want to keep everything as close to the factory position as possible. So go ahead and snug this one up as well. You don't want to over snug them. And now we're ready for install. Sometimes it's a little difficult to get these on because they're a new part, they're stiff, they're not, lubricated, there's no type of flex on the hose. So I recommend using some type of lubrication that's going to be inert. It's not going to damage anything and it'll dissipate with heat. You can spit on your finger and rub just a little bit, will give you a little bit of lubrication, or some type of silicone spray that will evaporate. So we're going to go ahead and install this, try and get it on there. So you're going to come back in here to the same location, make sure you have it pointed in the same direction. When installing this part, keep in mind that I have an aftermarket air oil separator and this line will not be there. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult for me to slide the hose on and get the clamp situated. So you're just going to want to take your time Wiggle it on there. Once you get it on, you can rotate it a little bit to get it to where it needs to be. Make sure that it's flush and back up to where it needs to go. I recommend at this point, since it's a little harder for me to get this on there, you're just gonna take a flathead and maneuver the clamp to the right position. Once you get it located where you need it to be, I always recommend taking your fingers and going and checking around the ring to make sure that it's gonna seal the hose so we don't have to come back here and do this again. So again, remember that you can take your flathead and move the clamp around to where you can easily access the socket head. Now that we have it in the right location, we're going to go ahead and just slowly tighten it down. Be mindful, if you get too tight with it, you can damage the hose. You just want to get it snug and then maybe a quarter turn. Right about there is going to be my stopping point, and I don't want to go too much further so I don't damage the hose. Again, just double check everything, make sure it's tight and good to go. I'm going to move my air oil separator hose back up out of the way, and then we're going to go ahead and install the intercooler. I recommend starting with the throttle body side, that way it's a little easier to maneuver when you go to install the turbo side. So let's go ahead and put this on. You want to take your time, be very careful, and make sure you get it in the right position. Again, the hose is going to fight you, so you just want to take your time and wiggle it on. If you need to, you can take a flathead to pry the hose up onto the lip of the intercooler. Just be careful not to damage the hose. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten the worm clamp. Again, don't over tighten it, you don't want to damage the hose. Just get it snug enough to where it'll hold it on in place. Once you have it on, go ahead and double check it. Make sure that it's on there pretty good and tight. Let me give it one more snug so it doesn't back itself off. So we went ahead and removed the intercooler bracket. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall this here at this point, make it a little easier for everyone to see. We're going to put the two 12mm bolts back on to the manifold, the intake manifold. Again, be very careful not to cross thread these. If you do, you're going to have a bad day. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the last two for the intercooler. They're going to be 12mm bolts on the turbo side. Again, be careful not to cross thread them and or damage them in any way. We're going to tighten them up, get them snug, and then go quarter turn for those of you who do not have torque wrenches. And get them snug, and then a quarter turn. Snug, and then a quarter turn. Now we're going to finish the bracket that holds the intercooler. We're going to finish tightening that bolt up. It's going to be a 12mm bolt. Again, get it snug, and then a quarter turn. So now we're going to reinstall the last part, which is the recirculation valve. Go ahead and install the two 10mm bolts. Be careful not to cross thread them. Again, that'll cause a very bad day. Just take your time, whatever works best for you. I'm using the socket to help me get in there and start them up. Once you get them snug, again, just remember quarter turn. And now we're good to start her up.